Today we're going to be covering the rhubarb crowns, which we've grown now in this patch of the vegetable garden for the last 8 years in this position, I think. Now these crowns have been here a lot longer than that, and you can see at this time of year, we're shooting this around the middle of March. These crowns are really just starting to emerge through from the soil that we tidied up and cleaned away all the growth from last year that collapsed after the first frosts. Just before we cover these up, we're going to just go over this again. We put a top dressing of well rotted and chipped wood chippings on it just as a weed suppressant over the winter, but you can still see we've got a little bit of buttercup and stuff coming through here. There we go, creeping buttercup. I want to get out with a fork, get those roots well out before you cover this up. And the other thing you really want to get rid of, which is a problem in this area for us, is the stinging nettle. So we want to get that up because that's going to thrive under the covers. Now this time of year is an ideal opportunity to get your forcers or covers on to force this rhubarb, because pink forced rhubarb really is a completely different fruit or vegetable to naturally grown rhubarb. It's going to be twice as long, very nice and pink all the way up the stem, and extremely tender. And you've got one opportunity to do that each year, because by the time the weather warms up, the covers, the heat under them is just going to be too much, and you'll get wilt and soft and rot forming. Now when it comes to forcing rhubarb, what you're going to need is a light proof cover. Now you'll all have seen the lovely old terracotta antique and modern reproduction rhubarb forcers, which are tall, very narrow and very expensive. So my personal choice when you've got a whole run of rhubarb crowns like we have here is to use a combination of what's available or cheap to buy, and the options that we've got here are old-fashioned tin dustbins, the modern versions which are the black plastic dustbins, a collection of old, what I think were originally barrel water tubs, but my absolute personal favourite for a large crown of rhubarb with an extensive run is one of these, an old plastic water tank, which were sold in builders merchants for non-pressurised water cisterns in attics for a long period of time. I think they're still available. Not exactly certain how cheap they are to buy. They're certainly going to be a little bit more expensive than the equivalent dustbin, but the area of these, if you've got a big rhubarb crown like here, means that you can cover the whole thing with one of these. And height wise, it's a little shorter than the dustbins, but it's just as good, and that will give you a nice forced stem of rhubarb around 2 foot long. So let's get these into position, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it's going to take before you can start harvesting your rhubarb. Well, I've got those all in position over the rhubarb where we can see the big shoots coming through. You can see I've missed quite a few little bits around the side of some of these crowns. You're not going to be able to get everything unless you've got a real profusion of bins. And with these plastic ones, I'm going to have to put some weights on them, because I'm pretty certain over the next few weeks we're going to get some sufficient winds which will blow them off and damage the rhubarb that's developing under them. And with this big old one, you can see that I've nicely managed to surround a really good crown that's extending out all over the place there. Some really nice big buds coming through the surface there. I'm going to put a sheet of exterior plywood on there, and again a big breeze block or something to hold it in place. With the shorter and metal bins, you can usually get away without having to put any weights on, but it's a good idea if you have got some bricks or some breeze block around, just to weight these down and hold them in place, because you're going to need them in situ now for around between 4 and 6 weeks, depending on the air temperature and how quickly this rhubarb shoots. But keep an eye on it. It's easy to do if you've got one that you can just take the lid off like this to see how it's developing, and that will give you an idea of what's happening under some of the more narrow bins. As it grows up, it does start to be quite difficult to take the bins off to have a look what's going underneath it without a problem getting it back on, because the rhubarb will grow up quite quickly, and at the end of each of the stalks is going to be a green or yellowing leaf, and they do grow quite profusely under this and very quickly. So just keep an eye on them, and as soon as you've got enough length to start cutting, we're going to have excess rhubarb here and loads to freeze and to give away. So we start using it earlier in the season than you may do if you only had a single crown of rhubarb and we're looking to really maximise your crop. In that case, we're looking really for the leaves to get right up almost to the top of a container, even as tall as this 4-foot one, and get a really long stem of really good quality pink rhubarb. And we'll do a follow-up video to show you just how good it is and just how worthwhile it is investing in a bin like this to force your rhubarb at this time of year.